Hi, this is Amanda Tango. I am licensed to teach 4th through ninth grade language arts and social studies. I became aware of this opening position from a former classmate of mine who actually has a job here at the same district. I believe this district is phenomenal compared to neighboring districts. I would feel privileged to be a part of this district, and I feel like I can offer something unique and special to this district, so I would love to get to know more of the staff. Like I said, a former classmate of mine is already part of the staff team here, as well as a few others that I have come in contact through field experience. So I feel like I kind of have an upper hand on knowing a few people that are a part of this district, and I really feel like I can offer the students something that they can take with them to future grades. I know that I can make an impact, and I would love the opportunity to prove that not only to you and the students, but also to their parents. How familiar are you with the GPS in your content area? I personally am not familiar with the term GPS in your content area. If this is kind of going along the lines of developing lessons that move cross content, I have developed lesson plans that tap into multiple content areas. For example, if middle school students would be working with the novel Fallen Angels, written by Walter D. Myers, this can not only tap into enhancing students' literacy development skills, but it can also have history ties. It is a fictional novel, but it brings up the Vietnam War, which is a historical event in America's history as well as in Vietnam's history. So I feel like students could have students could benefit from one piece of literature in two different content areas. When we come into your classroom, what type of teaching would you see? I definitely love working with the students, having interaction with the students. So whenever you would walk into my classroom, you would see teacher to student interaction. I love a student-centered classroom, so I believe in the new, it's in literature, it's called the new lens, or the new context, or the new concept, excuse me. So this just means that I don't necessarily believe that a piece of literature has one true meaning, and that my interpretation of a novel or a piece of poetry is the correct meaning. I believe that each student has their own unique take on a piece of literature, whether that would be poetry, a novel, or even a journal entry from a historical figure in the past. I believe that each student's interpretation of that work is important, and I don't believe myself to be the only holder of the knowledge. I believe that I can learn from the students as well as they can learn from me. So if it's appropriate, I will allow them to express their ideas. I want them to feel comfortable in doing so. So you will definitely sense a positive relationship between the students and I whenever you walk into my classroom as well. They know that they can come to me for personal matters or matters that involve class content. Moving on to the next question, what do you believe it means to hold your students to high expectations for learning? What would you do to make that a reality for your students? I believe that holding your students to high expectations for learning, I interpret that as always expect your students to be able to complete a task to their best ability. Never hold students up to the same standards, even though we are supposed to. Take into consideration students' abilities, whether that would be their interest or lack of interest in a subject or activity. Make sure that you develop tasks that can tap into each student's interests so that they can prove their best abilities of what you're asking them to do. I definitely think that some educators make the mistake of showing their students that certain students that they expect them to fail. And as teachers, we should never outwardly show that we expect a student to fail, because if the student feels that you already expect them to fail, then why would they even try? Why or how could they put their best effort forth and prove to you that they are able to do it? So I feel like holding your students to high expectations is to allow them the chance to prove to you that they can complete a task to their best ability. Whether that would be lower than other students' completion of the task, that just reflects students' differences in their abilities and their interests. Moving on to the next question. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll add on to that question then, since there was kind of two there. What would you do to make that a reality for your students? I would, like I said, just make sure that I developed tasks that tapped into multiple interests. I would take into consideration each student, and I know it would be really hard to try and make a strategy and make an activity that would tap into each and every student's individual interest, but that's our job as educators, to make sure that each student is engaged. And I feel like you can naturally get students engaged by coming up with the appropriate tasks for your class. Moving on. Discuss how you view assessment and grading. How would you check for student learning during a unit of study? Explain your grading and what your grades would reflect. Assessment, formative and summative. I would definitely want both forms of assessment. I would definitely use a lot of observations through tasks to kind of just get an idea of where students are before I would implement those summative assessments. I only want to implement those summative assessments when I know that students have been given the proper material to prepare. A lot of teachers, just from my experience as a student, I feel like it would just be time for the test, so they just made us take the test, and a lot of us would be underprepared. And there's a difference of students being underprepared. If it's the teacher's fault that the student is underprepared, then the assessment would not yield accurate data. If the teachers have done everything they can to prepare the student, then they have done what they need to do in order to implement that assessment to yield accurate data. That being said, I think that assessment is a great data yielder. As teachers, we need to make sure that we use that data appropriately so that we know that we are doing our jobs right. Are we teaching these kids in a way that they are taking as much information as they can from us and being able to apply that to prove their knowledge of whatever content is at hand? So, trying to kind of see what else I have not mentioned yet. So then, how would I check a student's learning during a specific unit? I think that I've said all that needs to be said with that. I think I've answered that well. Discuss your thoughts and ideas about the middle school concepts and teaching a middle grades learner. So I know that during middle school, students are transitioning through, some of them are just transitioning from elementary to middle school. That can be scary. Some are going through phases in their life where they're trying to identify who they are. That can be scary. So taking that into consideration, middle schoolers are extremely vulnerable and fragile, even though they may put up this front and act like they're completely invincible. They truly need to be coaxed through each stage of their development, whether that be socially, emotionally, or academically. It's our job as educators to develop a comfortable and safe learning environment for them so that they can be the best versions of themselves. And I know that a lot of those scary changes during that time can be distracting. So with all of those outside factors, I would feel the responsibility to create lessons, create activities, create strategies that engage my learners so that, yes, those distractors are outside in the hall, but when you step into my classroom, you know what your duty is, what your goals are, and we will work together as a team to achieve those goals. Next question, tell us about how you would facilitate working collaboratively with your colleagues. What would you do to work with others to promote teaching and learning for your students? So, I definitely am a believer in team efforts are stronger than the single man team. By collaborating with teachers, say, since I'm a language arts and social studies teacher, say I land a job in 6th grade English and I'm only teaching language arts, but I would somehow like to incorporate history into my classroom because one, it's an interest of mine, and two, a lot of language arts can be tied with history. I could collaborate with the 6th grade history teacher and we could develop lessons together that touch on both of our content that we could cover separately in our classes, but yet both of us could find a way to kind of mend our content into each other's classes. So they could be working on, for example, the Vietnam War. And then I could have my English class reading Fallen Angels. And then at the end, when the history teacher and I are finished with this unit, we could come together and find a way for students to find the connection between, facts found in this fictional novel that talks about a soldier's experiences during the Vietnam War. Even though it's fictional, what factual evidence is provided in this novel that you have learned in history class? Even though this is a fictional novel, find the truth in this novel. Find something that an actual Vietnam soldier could relate to. What would you do to work with others to promote teaching and learning for your students? Like I said before, I just really think it's important for teachers to kind of express to each other what their goals are, and then maybe we could come together to make a decision on what goals we can all set and reach together. What goals will our students benefit from the most, and which goals can we all implement in our classrooms to make sure that these students are